All right, what is going on, everyone? I am Tim Berzins, and this is Amplified Vitality. Welcome back to another video. This one's going to be good because I'm going to be addressing one of the most common issues that people have when they start doing the sugar diet, sugar fasting, fruit fasting, the intermittent fruit fasting, whatever you want to call it, focusing on those sugary, fruity foods at the exclusion of protein and fat and even starch in a lot of cases. That kind of style of eating can boost the metabolism. It can be very powerful for a lot of things within the metabolism. A lot of people are getting really fast weight loss with it, abundant energy, better sleep, all that kind of stuff that we really want to get out of our diet when we have that high metabolic rate. It is a tool in our toolbox that is incredible to use. However, not everyone has the same effects. There can be sticking points. I addressed that in the last video. But there's something specific that people have a lot of issues with, and that can be bloating. When you're eating more fruits and you're eating more fibers and more fermentable foods, there is this effect of bloating that can happen. And this is actually a sign of something else going on. One of the coolest things I think about the sugar diet in general is the fact that it reveals these different spots within your metabolism and physiology that can be stuff to look at. So for example, digestion that we're going to talk about today and bacterial overload. This is obviously something that you can see very quickly when you see bloating from eating lots of fruit. Similarly, if we have liver issues and we have undermethylation issues, we have a hard time exporting fat, or even if we have fatty liver to begin with, this is going to reveal itself through a diet like this. So all of these kinds of things, to me, it sparks something really interesting. It's a way to understand our physiology on a deeper level and start to dive into it so that we can correct ourselves, whether it is with a sugar diet or with moving on to some other kind of diet. Regardless, it's going to be something that shows us something about ourselves. So with that, let's dive in, and we're going to be talking about SIBO. So with that, let's dive in. What is happening? Why are people getting bloating when they're starting to eat more fruits, when they're starting to have more of these sugary sources? Well, the primary cause for this has to do with the fermentation of these foods by the bacteria in our digestive system. Particularly, the bacteria is supposed to stay in the colon, in the large intestine. There, it can have a lot of positive effects. It can eat some of the food that we can't digest, like those fibers. However, if the bacteria grow and multiply too much, or if there's an imbalance in the type of species that exist, then we can have issues like endotoxin reaction. And more importantly, in this case, we can have something called SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. The small intestine is the area where we do most of the absorbing of the nutrients from the foods that we eat. It is supposed to be sterile. It is not supposed to have any bacteria in it. However, if the microbiome is very proliferant and it is able to grow up into the small intestine, then we start to have some issues. And it's not just from the large microbiome growing up, it's also from poor digestion, not sterilizing the food on the way down. So there's a couple different ways that we're going to be able to approach this, and that's what we're going to be diving into today. The biggest issue with SIBO is that because the small intestine is where we absorb most of our nutrients, if we have an overgrowth of bacteria in that place, then what typically ends up happening is we feed the bacteria first, and then we eat second. So we're eating the waste product from these bacteria instead of absorbing those nutrients directly. Now, like I said before, in the large intestine with foods that we can't digest, like resistant starches and soluble fibers or fermentable fibers, this can be a very good thing. We can get some of those short chain fatty acids like the acetic acid, the butyric acid, the propionic acid. Those can have really powerful effects for fueling the gut lining, allowing the intestinal cells to stay tight, to have those tight junctions, and only allow in the nutrients to our system that we want, so we have a stronger barrier function. Those short-chain fatty acids can also feed the liver, and they can be very powerful for boosting the metabolism. Butyric acid specifically has been associated with a reduction in obesity and a greater ability to lose fat. So there's some really cool stuff going on with that. However, we don't only want to be eating the waste products of these bacteria. That's reserved for just those foods that we can't digest ourselves. If we're having this effect whenever we're eating any kind of carbohydrates because the bacteria is in the small intestine, and rather than us absorbing those nutrients and using them ourselves, the bacteria is eating them, and then we're having the byproducts, the poop, the waste from that bacteria, this is obviously going to cause some health issues. Specifically, people who have poor digestion, who have the burnout, adrenal symptoms, who have a certain level of malnourishment. These are all the effects that can happen from having the bacteria eating first, because we're not actually supplying that nutrition that our body needs in order to have all those systems work functionally. Now, coming from the bioenergetic Ray Peat sphere, Ray Peat very much believed that bacteria should be kept to a complete minimum and that a sterile gut all the way through the microbiome was best. In certain studies where animals were kept in very sterile environments, they seemed to have better health effects when they had clear guts. However, out in the real world, where you actually are exposed to bacteria and other pathogens, having a gut microbiome is very important. Your immune system does not work the same way. If you have a purely sterile gut, you are more susceptible to infections and a whole host of other negative things. So while that does speak to something interesting going on, it's not the case that we want to try to completely sterilize the gut. Again, like I talked about before, if there's different species of bacteria that are out of balance, that are causing some negative reactions like endotoxin reactions and things like that, and if the bacteria have grown into the small intestine, then doing a complete wipeout with something like an antibiotic can be helpful. But again, you're going to have more bacteria come in. There's no way to really avoid that in this world. And you do want those bacteria. Those bacteria will help you to have more of a immune barrier function to the different pathogens that exist out in the world. Our bodies have to be able to have that barrier, to have our insides protected from the outside, so that we only allow in the things that we want to allow in and keep out the things that we don't want to let in. So having addressed all that, let's dive in. I have 3 things specifically that I think are the most powerful ways to reduce SIBO, to get your body absorbing, your small intestine absorbing the nutrients directly. And these things will greatly help your success on the sugar diet, on a fruit fasting type of plan. And even if you don't follow that kind of plan, it's still going to be very helpful because you're going to be using the nutrients from your food so much more effectively and get those body systems, the liver axis, the steroid hormone axis, the gut digestion, gut microbiome, all of that stuff, get all these axes all in alignment so that they can all start working properly again. So the first one I actually addressed in the previous video. It's not something new, but I do need to clarify some stuff on it because it was misinterpreted in the last video. And that is to have coconut oil, especially virgin coconut oil, in the morning with whatever first meal that you have, whether that's fruits or some sort of starch. You can also microdose this throughout the day, and that can actually be a really beneficial way to do this as well. But the major point here is that a lot of people got confused and thought I was talking about MCT oil. And while the MCTs in coconut oil do contribute to a lot of the liver effects, MCT oil and coconut oil are not the same thing. MCT oil is primarily composed of the shorter medium chain triglycerides, capric, caproic, and caprylic acids, whereas coconut oil is 50% lauric acid, which is a 12-carbon fatty acid. It kind of exists between the long chain and the medium chain fatty acids. If you ever see a reading for coconut oil that says it's only 15% medium chain triglycerides, the reason is because they're not counting lauric acid. If you count lauric acid, it's 65% medium chain triglycerides. So if this fatty acid kind of lives in both worlds, then why do we want to emphasize it? Well, it turns out that lauric acid has the most potent antimicrobial effect of all of the fatty acids. It also is related to immune function and a lot of other really cool stuff in the body. So lauric acid is not something you want to sleep on. It's definitely something you want to include. And most of the medium chain triglyceride oil products, the MCT oil products, will not contain that lauric acid. In addition to this, when I was speaking about it before, the studies that looked at a reduction in fatty liver from the coconut oil, it used virgin coconut oil. It didn't use refined coconut oil. It didn't use MCT oil. I think that to replicate those results, it is important to do the same thing. Some of that might be because of the polyphenols that are in virgin coconut oil that get stripped away when it's refined, but it definitely also has to do with the lauric acid. So including some of that in the morning with your morning meal can be very helpful. Spacing it throughout the day slowly can be helpful. And again, it also has those liver activating benefits. So usually after having coconut oil, and especially if you pair it with some sugars and some carbs, you're going to feel hot. You're going to warm up. You're going to have energy. It's that activating factor that allows things to just get clicking. So I definitely think adding virgin coconut oil is a very important thing. But there's actually more here because the other 35% of virgin coconut oil is the longer chain saturated fatty acids. Why is this important? Well, yes, we don't want to overdo fats on this diet. The importance is to keep fat as low as possible. However, a little bit of fat along with some soluble fibers can be very, very helpful for keeping SIBO down. And the reason is the longer chain fats require bile acid secretion in order to emulsify them and digest them. Bile acid is intimately tied to liver health, but also to the gut microbiome and digestive health in general. And most importantly for our conversation here, bile acid has a strong antimicrobial effect as well. And so if you're having the bile acid from your gallbladder released via cholecystokinin, which is stimulated by the intake of fat, specifically long-chain fatty acids, then you will get that bile acid release into the intestines and have that sterilizing effect. Particularly if you pair it with some sort of soluble fiber. Soluble fiber will bind bile acid and it will take it through the system and excrete it. This allows it to have its antimicrobial effect all the way through the intestines. It also causes the bile, which might have some toxins that the liver is excreting. It causes those to be released. It also causes the liver to make new bile. Bile is one of the endpoints of cholesterol in the body. So because on something like the sugar diet, we are adding substrates into this cycle that can create a higher level of LDL cholesterol, we want to do the things that make sure we're using that cholesterol properly so that it's not just pooling up in the blood. One of those main things is producing strong bile acid that allows us to digest fat really well and get the hormonal benefits from fat that we want, rather than having some of the negative effects that can happen from it. Again, we're not going crazy with fat. This is not to say that we should be upping to 60, 70, 80 grams of fat a day. That can be doable on a normal style diet, but on something like the sugar diet or on even just a high carb, low fat, that's going to be a little more than we want. We really want to keep fat closer to something like 30 or 40 grams at the most. And if you really want to push it, 20 or 30 grams. But that does mean that anytime you are consuming a fermentable fiber or fermentable food in general, it can be helpful to add just a little bit of fat, especially from coconut oil, because like I said, that lauric acid has that antimicrobial effect as well. But it also gives the opportunity to microdose with a little bit of other types of fats that can be very helpful for metabolism. One option that I've used before that I really like is to take a couple of cocoa butter tabs. They come in these little pellet type things, and put them in oatmeal. It makes it taste like you're eating an oatmeal cookie almost. You're not adding that much fat. You can add just 2 to 3 if you want, which adds something like 5 grams of fat. But you're stimulating bile acid release just enough that the fermentable fibers in the oatmeal, in the case of this meal, are going to bind that bile acid and create that antimicrobial effect. Especially because there are certain fats that have very powerful effects, like cocoa butter. Cocoa butter is 35% stearic acid, which is the 18-chain saturated carbon fatty acid. This fatty acid in humans has been shown to cause mitochondrial fusion, which basically makes the mitochondria in the cells bigger, stronger, more efficient. It increases your metabolism in a very effective way. That's why there's all this craze about beef tallow right now, which is higher in stearic acid, but it's also mostly oleic acid. So the people who are claiming that it's only a saturated fat, it's really not that simple. Palmitic acid tends to be the one that has worse outcomes, whereas stearic acid has better outcomes. This is another video for another time, and I will go into this because saturated fat is a really fun topic, a really interesting topic to explore. But for the purposes of this conversation, microdosing with these powerful fats, whether it's the MCTs, lauric acid, or stearic acid, we can allow ourselves to get this antimicrobial effect that reduces SIBO while also supplementing and microdosing these little beneficial effects. All right, now the second thing that we can do to reduce the SIBO effect and reduce the bloating that we're getting from consuming these higher sugar foods and from consuming more fruits and even starches to a certain extent is to make sure that we're eating a lot of high polyphenol foods. A lot of people have been obsessed with polyphenols because it seems like they have some really good metabolic effects, particularly helping with cardiovascular risk and things like that. But one of the really interesting things that I think not many people realize about polyphenols is that they are hardly absorbed at all. Most are 1 to 2%. You might see 5 to 10% at most in certain foods, but I've never seen anything really above 10% for the absorption of polyphenols. This is why a lot of companies will actually pair it with bioperine, the black pepper extract, which helps to increase the absorption something like 1,000 times, 1,000-fold, which is a really high amount to be increasing the absorption of a certain nutrient. And it is my assertion that I don't think that's actually what the polyphenols are meant to do. Polyphenols are meant to modulate the gut microbiome because they have an antimicrobial effect, and it might be a selective antimicrobial effect, meaning that it can actually reduce certain strands and species of bacteria while preserving other strands. And I think that this is where you're getting a lot of those positive health benefits because of this modulating process. The strongest polyphenols that seem to be in our regular diet seem to come from coffee, green tea, and red wine. Obviously, you wouldn't want to be drinking red wine all day long unless maybe it's a Sunday and you have a day off or something like that. But still including a little bit of coffee can be helpful. And yes, a lot of people on the sugar diet are cutting caffeine out entirely. Stims, can have a certain effect that you don't really need them anymore because you're getting such energy from the sugar. However, including those polyphenols can still be very effective. A way that I like to test this that is a very controlled way of doing so, cuts out many variables, is simply to take an EGCG supplement, which is a green tea catechin extract supplement. This has all the polyphenols from the green tea, which are very, very potent, and it doesn't come with much caffeine at all. It doesn't come with all the other compounds. Coffee has theobromine and a bunch of other stuff in it. And so taking just a supplement like this, like EGCG, can allow you to get those polyphenols without having all these other factors influencing it. It allows you to test it a little bit more to see if it's having that positive effect that we want. One other fun little morning supplement you can do, which seems to be really helpful for a lot of different things in the body, is to blend up some ginger and some turmeric with a little bit of garlic and some lemon juice. Add a little water, blend it up, strain it off with a nut milk bag or something like that, and then just take it as a shot. These warm the body up. You can feel it instantly. It has a lot of nutrition in a very small substance, and it kind of gets you sparked for the day. Lots of polyphenols in turmeric. That's curcumin, which a lot of people have been taking as a supplement, again, paired with bioperine, black pepper extract, to increase the solubility or the absorption. We're not trying to increase the absorption, so there's no need to worry about adding black pepper. All you want to do is just get those polyphenols in, strain it through the nut bag, take it as a shot, and start your day. It could be very helpful. It could be very fun to try out as an experiment. And finally, the third thing that we can do to help reduce the SIBO while we're on something like the sugar diet, or even just any diet that includes some fermentable foods in general, is going to be to consume less fermentable foods. Now, that might sound very simple, just avoid the fermentable foods and therefore the bacteria won't be able to eat them. However, we don't want to sleep on the benefits of having that soluble fiber, especially like I said before with adding in a little bit of the fat, getting the bile acids, because then you're getting that antimicrobial effect as the soluble fiber binds it and takes it through the system. So fiber can be broken into 4 different categories, technically. There's the insoluble fiber, which can be fermentable or non-fermentable, and then the soluble fiber, which can be fermentable or non-fermentable. Most insoluble fiber is non-fermentable. It doesn't really do much in the body other than speed up gut motility. It doesn't absorb water. It doesn't interact too much with too many things. It can have some modulating effects on the bacteria in the gut microbiome, but for the most part, it just helps to speed digestion, which can be a good thing because we don't really want our food sitting in our stomachs for too long. That's when things can get overly fermented. That's when food particles can putrefy and things like that. And it's just where a lot of endotoxin production or maybe even mold or fungi can come in. So we definitely don't want food sitting in the gut for too long. That's where insoluble fiber really shines. On the other side, we have our soluble fiber. And while most soluble fibers are fermentable, there are some that are non-fermentable. And we're going to be talking about that in a second. The soluble fibers will absorb water and they slow the digestion, but they also add volume to our food contents. And this is important because if you imagine the intestine, it has all the microvilli that absorb the nutrients. And if the food isn't pressed out with enough volume, then it doesn't really come in contact with the microvilli. That's going to affect your absorption. So adding insoluble fiber adds bulk to the stool and it adds the ability for it to come in contact with that brush border a little more strongly. However, like we said, if you have SIBO and you're having these bloating effects from eating these foods, then the bacteria are eating those fibers and probably eating some of the nutrients that we want to be absorbing. And so this is going to be a problem. This is where we want to really lean on soluble fibers that are not fermentable. And the one that stands out above all other fibers is psyllium husk. Psyllium husk is from corn. It is a soluble fiber. And like I said, it is the one that is the most non-fermentable of all. The best way to take psyllium husk is just to have it as a supplement. You can add it into a fruit smoothie or a shake or something like that, and it adds a decent amount of extra fiber. And if you pair this with coconut oil, like I said in the beginning of the video, now you're getting this triple whammy. The coconut oil is providing the lauric acid, which is having a sterilizing effect on the small intestine. The soluble fiber is binding the bile acids that are released from the long chain fatty acids in the coconut oil. And then that is being transported through the small intestine and having an antimicrobial effect. And this is a soluble fiber that is non-fermentable, so it can't feed those bacteria anyway. So you're really covering all your bases when you try something like this and combine those factors together in the way that I'm describing. So pairing psyllium husk and virgin coconut oil in some sort of fruit smoothie shake of some sort, it can be a very helpful tool for healing SIBO. Definitely something that is worth testing out and trying for yourself. Now, obviously on this diet, we're consuming more fruits and more fruit juices, more sugary sources. Fruits tend to have fermentable soluble fiber in them. That is why people who are doing more of the fruit fasting type of thing can get more of those SIBO effects. This can be the downside to consuming more of the whole-based foods, the whole foods in their form, versus moving into the more refined sources. I do still think the nutrition is important from getting mostly whole fruits, but this does make a case for having a little more refined sugar. If you are going to go the more refined sugar source, or even just add a little bit more refined sugar in, make sure you're not doing too much all at once. I've talked before about how fructose absorption is lower than a lot of other nutrients, and it especially takes time to ramp up the expression of GLUT5 in the epithelial cell intestinal border, which takes up fructose into the intestinal cell. It is more expressed as you continue to consume more fructose, so it is something that you wouldn't want to jump into a huge amount all at once. At the same time, you can also overwhelm your fructose absorption if you have too much all at once, and so part of this is make sure you're not overdoing it by having too much fructose in one sitting. That could overwhelm it. Fructose can also be fermented, and if it makes its way to the gut microbiome, that can have some negative effects. It can create some endotoxin, all that stuff that we don't want, creates metabolic disturbances, etc. However, if we are sticking to more wholesome sources, there are still a few things that we can do. First of all, not all fruits are equally fermentable. Some have much more fermentable fibers, some have far less fermentable fibers. Topping the list for the safer fruits overall that have less of these fermentable fibers in them include cantaloupe, honeydew, watermelon. I don't like cantaloupe or honeydew. Honeydew's okay, but watermelon's a great option. Really, really good, especially if you dip it in honey and add a little salt. That could be really, really awesome. Shout out to a client for offering that solution to me. That's a really good food option if any of you are interested in trying that. We also have grapes, pineapples, and peaches. And especially where I live on the East Coast in America, there is peach season is coming up. So peaches are a really good option as well. And then we also have plums, papayas, and cherries. So again, this is a list of fruits that are all safer in general because they contain less of those soluble fibers. Again, I'll run through it. Cantaloupe, honeydew, watermelon, grapes, pineapples, peaches, plum, papaya, and cherries. They seem to be the safest of them all. Things like bananas, dates, apples, these are going to be perfectly fine foods, but they definitely have more of those fermentable fibers. So if you get bloating, these might be the foods you would want to stay away from. And again, if your bacteria are eating the foods before you're eating them, then you're going to have a whole host of problems, and it's just going to cause a lot of issues for you. Finally, there is one more piece here, and that is leaning a little harder on juices. So juices have the fiber taken out, and so you're just getting the sugar and the polyphenols from those fruits. This is very powerful. You're also still obviously getting the antioxidants and the B vitamins, all that other nutrition that's so good for it. And one kind of juice that I would push people towards to trying is pomegranate juice. If you have pomegranate juice, there's no fiber, there's no fermentable things left around in it, but pomegranate juice has a lot of polyphenols, probably as much as red wine, if not more. It has a lot of antioxidants in it, plenty of nutrition, and so this can be something that could be very helpful for all of these things. Including the juice still allows you to lean on wholesome foods, but you're taking out the component that would be feeding the SIBO, and therefore it makes it a little bit easy. Obviously, honey is also going to be very, very helpful for this, and still have those polyphenols and some nutrition that can prevent maple syrup as well. That's another option. And then, like I said, if you want to go the refined sources, that is okay. I wouldn't exclusively do the refined sources, but I would make sure that you're not overdoing it all in one sitting, and that you are still pairing it with some sort of polyphenols and making sure that you're getting your antioxidants and your B vitamins and all the stuff that you need to process that food. And an option could be to take something like the EGCG I mentioned earlier with, the refined sugar source, because then you're adding a polyphenol to it and it will kind of protect it and just make it a little bit better. So with all that, I think we have covered SIBO and how to prevent that bloating. That is such a common concern I see in the comments when we're talking about fruit fasting and when we're talking about the sugar diet or sugar fasting. This is something that is not just a side effect that you have to deal with or a complication. This is actually preventing the results that you want from the sugar diet, from the fruit fasting, because of the fact that the bacteria are taking over. they're having a more negative impact on your metabolism, on your nutrient absorption, and that's affecting your liver, it's affecting your gut microbiome. This affects so many different areas of the metabolism, of the physiology, that are just going to throw the system in awry and make it into something that is not helpful for our end goals of having more energy, losing weight, feeling good, sleeping well, having a high sex drive, all of those kinds of things. So if you like this video, please hit subscribe. Please give me a like and share it with anyone who you think might be interested in it. As always, I am always active in the comments, so please leave a comment asking questions, giving me ideas, any concerns, anything that you think of that could be an interesting addition to the conversation. I love to keep this going and I love to keep exploring. Thank you all so much for such the positive feedback that we've been getting over the past month. I have a lot more content coming out. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. June has been a busy month, but the next couple months are going to open up a little bit and I will be producing plenty of more content. So please stay tuned. Check me out on Instagram, link below. I have a Patreon account as well, which I'm going to also be posting more on. Check that below as well. And until next time, I will see you guys. Take it easy. Peace.